Good morning. I'm David Hadwiger. I'm with the New Mexico Department of Transportation Research Bureau. Before introducing today's panelists, I'd like to share a short PowerPoint presentation on transportation in New Mexico. The future is now. We are in the middle of a fundamental overhaul of how transportation will operate in the near future. Let me give you a few examples of transformative technologies that are being developed in New Mexico today. New Mexico is leading in research on innovative construction materials. New Mexico State University has one of the foremost research teams studying use of ultra-high performance concrete. The University of New Mexico is using glass fiber reinforced polymer to design an insert for corroded corrugated metal culverts that will be light to install, strong, affordable, and extend culvert life by decades. Self-driving trucks are on New Mexico's highways today. Two simple Embark and Daimler trucks are testing autonomous trucks on I-10 and I-40. They still have drivers in the trucks as backups. Embark is testing platooned trucks using vehicle-to-vehicle technologies. Last month, the legislature passed House Bill 270, which will allow NMDOT to promulgate rules to expand autonomous vehicle testing in the state. Over the next decade, New Mexico will see tremendous growth in the number of electric vehicles on the road and the supercharger infrastructure to support electric vehicles statewide. Flying cars. This is one of my favorites. A few weeks ago, an Albuquerque-based company announced that it is partnering with a Dutch company to build a car that can become a gyroplane. UNM recently purchased an experimental 3D bridge printer about the size of a garage door in cooperation with the University of California. They're using the device to test materials and processes that could be used to print bridge elements or even print entire bridges in the future. NMSU's Physical Science Laboratory is one of the 7 Federal Aviation Administration approved and funded unmanned aircraft systems test sites nationally. UNM and Transit, a regional university transportation research center, are collaborating to test use of augmented reality goggles to enhance bridge inspection. NMDOT has installed innovative dust storm detection systems on I-10 at the Lordsburg Playa. They trigger variable speed limit and electronic message boards. NMDOT has also installed a cutting-edge thermal detection system that identifies wildlife along US 550 near Cuba. This illuminates a warning sign to motorists when elk, deer, and other large animals are approaching the highway. NMSU is part of a consortium funded by the National Science Foundation to study how we can learn from nature to improve our civil engineering technologies. So, as the guy from the Research Bureau at NMDOT, I hope this brief PowerPoint has stimulated your creative juices. Over the next several months, as you attend webinars, read articles, or just as you're at your work sites, please take a moment to think about whether you can identify a good idea that might make a good research project. You can share your ideas with Drew Lovelace. His email address is here. Drew is a brilliant, friendly individual who will help you figure out whether your idea could become a research proposal to submit for funding at the end of the year. Today, we will hear from 3 panelists who will present topics related to NMDOT research projects. As you listen to the presentation, I hope you will type your questions into the chat box. We will answer as many as possible after all three panelists have spoken. Let me introduce our first panelist. Dr. Ehsan Degan-Niri is currently an assistant professor in the Civil Engineering Department and an affiliated faculty member of the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department at NMSU. Dr. Degan-Niri has worked as a scientist in materials and processes engineering at General Electric. He is the author of 22 scientific journal publications and has 14 US and European published patents. Dr. Degan-Niri will be speaking on development of technical guidance for the assessment of oversize and overweight vehicle permit fees in New Mexico. Dr. Degan-Niri, I'll pass this to you.
Thank you so much, David. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, I can hear you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, you're running well.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Hadwiger, for the introduction. This is Ehsan Degan-Niri. I'm an assistant professor in Civil Engineering Department. I'm going to talk about today about the projects we have with New Mexico Department of Transportation, which is development of technical guide for assessment of oversized and overweight vehicle permit fees. So in this presentation, I'm going to mainly focus on the data-driven approach that we take in this particular project. So I will talk a little bit about the state of the problem, where we are, and what was the motivation of doing this research, and then a little bit of talk about the oversized and overweight permit data that we have from ProMiles and most common trucks that is going through our state, and finally I'm going to talk about a more advanced approach that we take to evaluate damage based on a data-driven approach that we are developing here at NMSU to evaluate the damage of oversized, overweight vehicles to our infrastructures. Okay, and finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the path forward. So on the left side, you will see the distribution of 2,000 bridges across New Mexico state. Okay, so all of those dots are bridges. Okay, so you see that what we did in 2019, based on the permit data we had, okay, we calculated the number of overweight, oversized vehicles per bridge, okay, per day. So you can see that some of those experience almost 100 oversized, overweight vehicles per day. And you can see most of the areas that are impacted by these oversized, overweight vehicles. On the right side, you will see the bridge deterioration. The way that we calculated these dots is we measured the change in the bridge rating between 2017 and 2019. And those who had the drop in the bridge rating, we highlighted those in here. And for example, -3 is in here, 3 ratings drop of the bridge deck. And you can see here that a distribution of bridges from 2017 to 2019 change or deterioration of the bridges. So now the question is, what is the relationship between the left side and right side? But let me, and you can see that we have huge amount of data, and we want to really take the data-driven approach. But let me just go a little back and talk about the phase 1. So what really motivated us to perform these tests is the question of how we can maintain our bridges and allocate money to those. Are we charging enough permit fee for those vehicles crossing our states, and where we are in terms of that when we compare that with other states. In the first phase, we realized with a very brief survey that we are among the states that charge the lowest amount of permit fee for oversized, overweight vehicles. You can see the New Mexico state comparison of this is the amount of revenue in million per year. I think it is for 2000, if my mind serves me correct, 2019 and before that in average. And you can see that Texas charge the maximum amount of overweight, oversized vehicle. So it's a very brief summary, like very simple survey. So in the second phase, in the first part of second phase, we decided to have a better comparison. So a more meaningful comparison, basically having the most common scenarios of oversized and overweight vehicles, and then go back to those states again, and then get a quote maybe in the second task and compare basically the value. In this way, we have a better comparison, okay? So, but here I'm going to talk mainly about the first task, okay, and then third task, which was more of the data driven. In the first task, I explained how we use the data to come up with those scenarios that eventually we can compare apple to apple. And then on the third task, which is more advanced, I will explain how we, what is our approach to make that even better quantification or evaluation or estimation of the damage, okay, or cost to the our infrastructure. So we had initially we had 3 years of data from ProMiles. ProMiles is a company operating or in many different states. And basically when you want to get a permit for oversized overweight, this is a company that handles New Mexico state. So they have a lot of different data. So in particular, there are 2 types of data that we are very interested. The first one is the information about the vehicle alone. Okay, so how large is the vehicle, how heavy is the vehicle, number of axles, all of those are in the single trip permit are documented. We have close to 400,000 permits for 3 years. On the right side, you see the shape files, which is exactly the route those permits took. And this is a very important information here. Now I'm going to show you how we are going to use that in the first step to come up with the most common scenarios. And in the third task, basically how we use this data to evaluate the damage to the bridges based on this data. So you can see here, we initially designed a framework. Okay, so on the left side, you see the Python kind of programming, which is it's a huge amount of data. We cannot use typical programming languages. We use Python. We created a framework that we can use here. We, on the right side, you can see that the distribution of the number of axles. Basically what we did, we picked few of those features to narrow down our choices. We first, in the first stage, we looked at the distribution of number of axles. Okay, for example, you can see in this case it is like a distribution, and then you have distribution of gross vehicle weights, and then after we have these 2, we picked most common axle number and the most common gross vehicle weight range. And then in the next stage, what we did, we used the distribution of axle spacing to see now what are the most common ranges for axle spacing, and then distribution of the axle weight, what are the most common one. Eventually we came up with the range, and then we use the distribution of travel distance for identifying the route that is very common in New Mexico. Then based on those, we could select a scenario which is a real case now. Okay, which is a real case now. And we can then go to other states and get a quote in the second task to compare the value. You can see here one example. It's just like oversized, overweight vehicle example. You see the number of axles, you see the gross vehicle weight distribution, you see the travel distance, which is associated with 2 particular routes here. And then eventually we picked one scenario. Overall, we came up with 7 scenarios from 5 different types of permits. Okay, we had close to 20 maybe or more types of permits, but 5 of those are very important in our study because either they are very heavy or they are very frequent. Okay, so we come up with 5 of those, and out of those 5, we selected 7 scenarios in the first task, and then you can see here from those seven scenarios that have overweight type, which as one of the most common are of the very important ones. Superload, because they are very heavy. Oversized, overweight, they are is another type that is pretty much heavy and frequent. Oversized is very frequent but not very heavy. Self-propelled is not very frequent, not very heavy, but they are very condensed. They may have huge impact on our infrastructures. And you can see the comparison, qualitative comparison of that in task 1 for the gross vehicle weight, which is the intensity of that load and the frequency, basically. Okay, so after task 2 is done, we performed a simple type comparison. We went to other states, we got a code, we compared the value, and we realized that okay, the conclusion of phase 1 was valid, and we are among those that we charge the minimum amount of the permit fee. So in the third task, now the question is how much, or on what basis we have to charge more. So are we gonna go and do, okay, this state charge this, we have to do the same, or are we gonna have a more scientific way of evaluation of damage, evaluation of the cost to the damage, and then at the end, basically calculating the amount that they cost us, basically, and they charge them that value based on the scientific facts. So for that reason, you can see this chart here is the load information is coming from the permit data. Bridge information is coming from the national bridge inventory data. I'm going to ignore environmental impact because, you know, we have environmental impact like temperature contrast, and I'm going to a little bit elaborate on that. So on this stage, in this basically phase, we are not going to consider environmental impact, which is very important aspect and causing damage to our infrastructure as well. And then we are going to, there are two main methods that are very common. One is the data-driven, the other is a mechanical method. We are going to take data-driven approach. In the next slides, I'm going to talk about those highlighted ones. But the final goal is after we evaluate the damage, we calculate the life consumption of the bridge and then calculate the cost. But these two steps are not part of this phase. So on the bridge side, this is a chart from the AASHTO. On the left side, you see the impact of load on the deterioration or the drop in the life of the bridge structures, okay? So two particular important information here is I want to highlight two very important information. When you have a load, moving load, one important information is the load intensity. The other one is the load frequency. Both of them are very important factor that we are going to extract from the permit data. On the right side, you have bridge parameters from the NBI data, which is age, maintenance time, material, geometry, average daily traffic, all of those, okay? And then we have bridge condition. So what we are going to do, we are going to create this data-driven approach. On the left side, what we are going to do, we are going to have the load intensity and frequency calculated based on the promiles or permit data. And then we have all the bridge parameters available for us on the NBI data, bridge inventory data. Then we have on the right side, deck rating, okay, superstructure rating, substructure rating, which is a somehow evaluation of what is the condition of a bridge, okay? And then we want to find the correlation between the left side and right side, okay? So I'm gonna go over the block number 1 and block number 2, and there are research ongoing to create the block number 3 and number 4, okay? So in general, bridge ratings is done in a scale between 0 to 9. So 0 is the worst and 9 is the, I think the other way. 0 is the best and 0 is the worst and 9 is the best, okay? So you can see here the distribution of the deck ratings, substructure rating and superstructure rating. So if you see a red dot means, oh, something is wrong. And for example, here we can see a red dot here. So it means it is close to maybe a rating of 1. And there are different levels of a structure. You can see here substructure, superstructure, and deck, okay? But it's not very, it's kind of hard to see the changes here. We have, based on AASHTO, 3 different groups, okay? So basically between 0 and 5, they call that poor. Between 5 and maybe 6 or 7, they call that fair. And then we have the good category. Here is a little bit better. You can see the clusters, but still it is not very representative. What we did in our research, we did another approach. What we did, we between 2017 and 2019, we calculated the differential value of these bridge ratings. So if it is going up, basically it is green, it is good. Either they maintain that or they did something to the bridge that they improved the bridge. And if it goes down, the rating, it is degraded. Now you can better see the areas of impact of infrastructure. But later you will see some of those about the load. So in this way, we really can represent and we can show the clusters of the areas that are getting impacted by the infrastructure with the load. And it is for superstructure, and then we have for substructure. So now for the load, the block diagram number 2, we are going to have those two values that I mentioned, very important: load frequency, load intensity. For the first time, we introduced average daily oversize overweight permit traffic, which is we call that ADPT. We are going to now, I'm going to show you some of the result of how we calculate this one per bridge for the entire New Mexico state using the available data we have. And the load intensity, basically we calculated that based on the average gross vehicle weight of trucks crossing the one bridge. So for example, let's say in 1 year we have 100, I don't know, 200 or 30,000 oversized vehicles going over a bridge. The average gross vehicle weight of that on that year, how much is that value? It's the load intensity for us. So for those 5 groups of types of permits, you can see now here on the left side, for example, for the oversized overweight, per day we have for those red dots almost 100 oversized. This is the total. This is the chart initially I showed on the left side. Over close to 100 vehicles, oversized overweight vehicles crossing those red dots. And on the right side, you can see the average gross vehicle weight of them is close to 93,000 pounds for those red dots. Okay, again, you can see here a kind of left side the frequency, right side the intensity. Now for different permits, left side the frequency, right side the intensity. And you can see here close to, for oversized, we have to, close to 15 per day for bridges. We have some bridges 15 per day, and we have the average gross vehicle of close to 80,000. This is very frequent type permit. On the left side, we have here this one for overweight one, and it is, you can see it is close to 1 maybe per day, and then 132,000 some of the bridges experience in average weight, which is pretty intense. And then you can see here for oversized overweight vehicle on the left side, close to 8 per day. You see that some bridges experience the maximum value, and you can see the maximum value of some bridges experience close to 193,000 pounds, which is, it shows the frequency drops a little bit, but intensity increased. Left side, again, frequency, right side, intensity for superload. Look at this one. The intensity is very, the frequency is very low, but look at the intensity, 747,000 pounds was one bridge experiencing. So overall, you can see for self-propelled the same. And now, basically, now I have the data on the right side, which is the bridge conditions. This is the differential value that I showed you. On the left side, I showed you how we calculated load intensity and load frequency. Now, in the next step, what we are going to do, we are going to use the feature extraction or some algorithm to pick the most common, most influential features in the bridge data inventory, and then create in the 4th step the data-driven prediction model that we can feed in anytime and predict the ratings in the right side. But, you know, this is more of the path forward, what we really want to do. The last slide is the end of basically phase 2. But really, what we want to do is we want to really consider more data on the load. The better data and the more accurate data or larger data you have, the better decision making you can do. So we want to expand that one in the future. Also, we want to consider the environmental impact. This graph here shows the contrast in temperature in March 2018 for the entire US. And you can see the contrast in temperature for the entire New Mexico is among the highest in the entire US. So basically we experience huge amount of contrast in temperature in New Mexico state, which is, I think it's going to impact a lot our infrastructures. And then we want to have a more advanced data-driven algorithm to predict the life consumption and the cost estimation, and at the same time have a feedback loop here to help more of the data-driven asset management. Our budget is limited, so which one we should go first to inspect, which one is going down and the rating is changing, which one, what are the areas that you want to start reconstructing bridges, or based on this environmental information that you have, what type of bridge is the best for that particular area. These are the questions that we want to address in the future. At the end, I really want to acknowledge and thank Mr. Jeff Vigil, Dr. Hadwiger, and Ms. Leslie Sanchez, and also Secretary Sandoval for their support and technical support and financial support for this project. And also my research group, 1 postdoc, 5 PhD students, 3 master's students, not all of them working on this project, but they contributed a lot to this project, and I want to thank them as well. So if you have any question, please shoot me an email. I'm going to post this link to my, this is a YouTube video that I created for our research here. I appreciate if you have, it can provide more information, details of information about what we are working on, and you can maybe, I'm going to send that in the chat room. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deganiri. So I would ask folks, if you have questions for our presenters, put them in the chat box. We will revisit that chat box at the end of the session, depending on how much time we have. Let me introduce our next presenter. Our next presenter is Burke Loki. Mr. Loki is the Bureau Chief and State Drainage Engineer for NMDOT's Drainage Design Bureau. His presentation flows pretty smoothly out of Dr. Deganiri's in that it deals with asset management. Mr. Loki is a civil and water resources engineer with extensive experience in water resources engineering and project management. As a consultant for more than 20 years, Burke led water resources groups for several major consulting firms, including Jacobs, Michael Baker, Inc., and PBS&J, now Atkins. Burke is going to be speaking about a new culvert asset management plan that NMDOT is going to be kicking off this summer. Sir, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hadwiger. Appreciate that. And thank you all for joining us today. As Dr. Hadwiger said, I am the Bureau Chief for the Drainage Design Bureau, and I am going to talk about our efforts to start a CAMP, or a culvert asset management plan. So what I'm going to talk about today is what exactly a CAMP is and why we need it. I want to mention a little bit about the benefits, and then we're going to talk some about how we're making it happen. So, first thing I'm going to start with is what is an asset management plan? First of all, it's a federally mandated initiative, and the state of New Mexico has actually created one. Our program is focused on pavement and bridges. We also have some other signs and signals I think are in there as well, but the focus is really on pavements and bridges, and so there's a lot of information about that, and so we are in the process of working with that. We have an assessment of the condition of those transportation assets statewide. However, our TAMP was adopted in August 2019, and the plan includes 12,400 miles of pavement, which with a replacement value of approximately $25 billion and almost 3,000 bridges. This is in the state right away, with a replacement value of almost $6 billion. But it doesn't include culverts at this point. Building on what the previous presentation, we want to, because the state's vision is a safe and sustainable multimodal transportation system, And our goals are to improve and enhance safety, preserve and maintain the infrastructure, enhance mobility, and enhance economic development. The transportation asset management at the DOT focuses on the second goal, preserving and maintaining the infrastructure. And we are the DOT actually does trying to use a data-driven, performance-based approach to make the best use of available resources. And you'll hear more about this, I think, from a subsequent presentation by Tammy Haas. Let's see, why do we need one? Well, okay, we don't currently have a current inventory. We have one, and a shout out to Dr. Hadwiger in the Research Bureau. We actually had a study done, sponsored by the Research Bureau, and was published, I think, in 2016 about what are best practices for culvert asset management programs. And that really helped us get started. But we've been concerned about this for a long time. We don't have a current inventory. We don't have an inspection program. Basically how we deal with existing culverts is pretty reactive. If they fall in or fail, we go out and try and figure out how to fix them. There's approximately, as best we can tell, about 55,000 culverts out there. These are all structures that are centerline span is 20 feet or less. So bridges are a whole separate deal. That's anything span over 20 feet. But the replacement value for the culverts is estimated at somewhere between $3 and $11 billion. So culverts are a substantial asset. I should note that more than half are old because so much of our roadway system was built in the 50s and 60s, and a lot of our culverts are that age. And the projected lifetime, the published lifetime for like metal culverts is somewhere between 30 and 40 years. So we've gone past that. We're into their second life. And some of those are even older. I've been working on some projects where we have culverts that were built as part of the CCC effort in the 30s. So you can see that we do, the culvert assets have aged. And in addition to that, we have a significantly harsh environmental conditions in Mexico because they're failing or deteriorating because we have corrosive soils or heavy sedimentation. So managing culverts then can, as an asset, can provide a lot of benefits. One, we have an up-to-date inventory. Second, we can reduce failures through regular inspection. Third, we can reduce emergency repair cost, which is a significant burden to districts. Fourth, we'll be able to do better planning for budgets for repair and replacement. And five, we'll have the ability to, over the long term, to identify the real life cycle and performance of various pipe materials. So these are all of the kind of things that we actually need to try and determine as part of this asset management program. The DOT needs a camp, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So we've talked to folks in the districts that are responsible for programming projects, and they have a pretty good idea of what they need to do for the pavements or for bridges. But when they go to program these, they have no idea what shape the culverts are in, whether or not the culverts are actually functional, whether they're deteriorating or they need to be replaced. That pushes that decision point down the road. And so a lot of times, once they get into the program, they realize that, okay, we have a significant problem with culverts and we need to do something about that. And that changes the whole picture, causes them to have to shuffle budgets, shuffle schedules. It becomes a huge problem for the districts when they're programming the projects. In addition, our project development engineers in the design region, because they don't know what the culvert conditions are, we have to add in that kind of effort in our design development process. For instance, one of the issues we're facing on, we've got a project on US 64 up between Arizona and Shiprock. And our project designers are waiting to get a CCT, closed circuit TV inspection so we can determine if a lot of those deep existing culverts can be slip lined, which would save us a lot of money, except now we're holding up the project because we have to get that arranged. So these are just a few projects that have been coming up recently. So another development issue, well, this is the Roswell to New Mexico, US 380. And so a big substantial part of that corridor study is devoted to figuring out what the status of these culverts are. Are they in good shape? Are they hydraulically adequate or not? This is the US 64 Arizona Shiprock. Again, 20 something miles, 130 culverts, of which approximately 30, we think 35 or so, are very deep. We could not effectively replace those by digging them up and replacing them if they need it. So we're doing the CCTV inspection and looking to see if we can slip line those. Another example is imminent or catastrophic failure of structures. That puts highway users in jeopardy. It makes district maintenance forces have to respond to those failures. Highway users then deal with road closures along detours. It's bad for interstate traffic. It's more serious in rural locations because sometimes you don't have the same kind of options for running detours. And so that becomes a huge problem. In addition, districts have to they have to divert funds from other programmed activities to emergency repairs and reactive responses to serious deterioration or failure is often several times more costly than proactive maintenance. And then there's opportunity costs. If you're having to spend money on fixing stuff, you can't spend that money on improving it. In addition, there are replacement and rehab options that could save the DOT significant amounts of money. Here's an example on I-40. This happened, I think, in 2016, where culvert on I-40 east of Grants fell in. Big hole opened up in the interstate, became an emergency project, and to replace this was a box, I think it's a 2-cell box, it cost over $1 million to do that. Another example, same I-40, and perchance this has something to do with the kind of traffic loads that the previous presentation indicated, but we went out to, this was a project east of Gallup, near the Flying J interchange. Some of these culverts had to be extended because we're adding lanes. They get out there and the contractor is going to just extend this culvert 10 feet and started looking at it and realized that the roof was falling in. This is like 2 or 3 inches of spalling, exposing rebar, and was determined to be a significant enough problem that we looked at different options to fix it. And ultimately, we went with a slip lining option, but it cost a lot more than if we had been able to do that as part of the original project. So what are we going to do? Well, TAMP requirements or transportation asset management, first step is you have to have an asset inventory. And so that's essentially what we're starting with. We need to work on objectives, metrics and targets about ultimately how long do we want these, or what shape do we want these culverts to actually stay in? And so that will guide our investment decisions. There's many other parts of this life cycle planning. I can see a future Research Bureau project, trying to identify many of these kind of efforts for culverts specifically in New Mexico. And ultimately, we wanted to get to the point where we have an investment strategy for how districts could incorporate culvert maintenance, culvert rehab into their long-term plans. And risk management is also an issue. So the way we're going about this, and again, another shout out to Dr. Hadwiger, because I've been working with him a couple of years, and he encouraged us here at the Bureau to actually go after a state planning and research grant to do an updated culvert inventory. So we applied for that. We got an initial award of $500,000 with assurance that we could get 2 additional $500,000 installments over a period of 6 years. And what we're going to use that initial award for is we're going to contract with the New Mexico State University and New Mexico Tech to put students out in the field for physical inspections. We expect to start this this summer. We actually have progressed, so we have the contracts in place and are getting the funding established, and so we're moving forward. We hope to have 4 to 8 teams of 2 students each spread out over the state. There will be a lot of coordination with the districts, and particularly with the patrols in terms of being able to coordinate inspections and make sure culverts are, the culverts that we're going to inspect are visible, which is not always the case. We hope to get approximately 60 to 80% of the 55,000 with the total, over the 6-year period. Concurrently, we're also going to work on with the districts and design regions and their consultants to mine culvert data from recent and ongoing roadway projects. So we don't think we actually have to physically inspect all of the culverts in the state because we do have several projects going on currently, and we think we can get the data we need from that. After that inventory is underway and we actually have some data in hand to start working with, then we're going to start figuring out how we can incorporate culverts into the DOT's asset management program. There's certainly a long way to go before we get there, but at least we have made a good start. Wanted to mention with regard to the inspection, we are working with AASHTO has recently published, actually in 2020, they republished a culvert inspection and maintenance guide, and we're going to use that as our basis for developing our own in-state inspection manual, and that's part of the contract with the universities. We're hoping that once we start getting that data in, we can actually start looking at life cycle costs of different kinds of culverts, as well as looking at replacement options for culverts, including trenchless construction and slip lining. There's another presentation in the conference, I think it's later today, about a project that's looking at glass fiber reinforced slip lining of culverts, and we're actually doing tests on that. So there's a lot of things going on with this. My contact information and David Trujillo's contact information is here. As I said, I'm the bureau chief. David is our project manager for this. David Trujillo is our project manager for this, and this is his contact info. And that will conclude my presentation. So look forward to working with universities on this. Again, a big shout out to the folks from the Research Bureau, as well as Jessica Griffin, who's the acting division manager or director for the planning division, and Todd Howell, and who's a GIS supervisor for the DOT, and Philip Montoya with the Asset Management Bureau. So all of those people have helped us substantially, and we do appreciate it. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dr. Hadwiger.
Thanks very much, Burke. Guys, I think this is exciting for us. When Research Bureau started first looking at culverts, one of the things we found was that there were maybe 3 or 4 culvert collapses on I-40 in the western part of the state. This a few years ago. Fortuitously, they were either on the shoulder or in the median. But gosh, that wasn't good news to any of us. So that's what got us really focused on this. Our next presenter is presenting on an evaluation of a dust storm awareness campaign that NMDOT ran over the last few years. I'm going to just throw a little hedge in here. We sometimes get a little bit competitive with Arizona DOT, who gets all the glory for their dust storm interventions. We have done some really great stuff. We've got revegetation, we've got the sensors I mentioned earlier, and we have this public awareness campaign. So I like to think we're doing pretty good. And this is a presentation that evaluates our public awareness campaign. Our next presenter is Dr. Lana Atkinson. Dr. Atkinson is a professor of political science and a Regents lecturer at UNM. She is director of the Center for the Study of Voting, Elections, and Democracy, and she's also director of the Institute for Social Research at UNM. She's an internationally recognized expert in election sciences and survey methodology. Her research is supported by the National Science Foundation, the Jet Foundation, Pew Charitable Trust, and many others. And you may have seen her on KOB TV, where she is a political and elections analyst. Dr. Atkinson will be speaking on freight and automobile driver awareness of dust storm safety. I'll pass it to you, Lana.
Thank you very much. So we're really moving in a different direction because I'm really talking about an assessment of a campaign to inform drivers about safety in regards to dust storm and what was effective in that campaign that was sponsored by NMDOT. You know, we're all familiar with dust storms in New Mexico. Dust storms are especially commonplace in southern New Mexico. They can be incredibly, lots and lots of dust, and they can prevent people from having any visibility on the road. And so this can be very, very dangerous. And so here's just some pictures of what a dust storm looks like. Like I said, we're really at the heart of dust storm season right now. We have all these incredible winds going on, and that can really have some negative impacts. Here's some information on dust storm crashes. They primarily affect Western states, though sometimes they affect other states, but really New Mexico and Arizona especially have a lot of problems with this, as well as Texas. So here we can see that there's just, ongoing, this is just the last, 5 years or so. And the number of vehicles that have been in traffic accidents is quite large. And of course, sometimes there's actually a loss of life. And, these are preventable if we can, provide information to drivers and truck drivers, especially informing them of what actions they can take to ensure their safety. So, we have lots and lots of possibilities for crashes, especially, again, as I said, freight drivers who, when they are involved in these crashes, can lead to fatalities. These are actually pictures taken of a dust storm crash down in southern New Mexico in 2014. We can see that we had already put up these signs. Caution, dust storms may exist. When these crashes happen, often, sometimes because a regular car, a regular driver will just get into a dust storm and just stop on the highway. And then, someone just following them, a truck, for example, who actually appears to have, from other research, may have better visibility because of their height. and may feel that the dust storm is safe, and then ultimately may hit one of those cars, leading to a tragic loss of life. Since 2014, we've had 18 fatalities in New Mexico due to dust storms. In New Mexico, we have a plan for, what do we recommend drivers should do to play it safe in a dust storm, and they should pull off the road as soon as possible. They should, especially if they can't exit the highway. That's often not possible because there is no exit to the highway nearby. There are long stretches of New Mexico highway where there is no exits or off ramps for miles and miles. It's really important that people turn off all the vehicle lights, including their emergency flashers. And one of the things we found in the study is that this part of the instructions is complicated for people, because in almost every other safety situation, people are told to turn on their lights and include their emergency flashers. And so sort of people's historical experience and their driving experience, their lived experience tells them otherwise. And so this is a real problem for communicating this information. And as part of that, they also have to set their emergency brake and take their foot off the brake. The point here is if you're in a dust storm and you are pulled off to the side of the road, but you have your brake lights on, the likelihood of someone else who can't see very well sees your lights and then just crashes into you and kills you. So that's why you have to go completely dark when you pull off to the side of the road. But that's something really difficult and people don't understand it. And we need to think about how to expand our recommendations to explain why that's necessary so that more people will do the right thing. Next slide. The driver education campaign pretty much happened every spring, and that was the responsibility of the NMDOT to do the driver education campaign. That included radio advertisements run in key markets, especially dust storms markets, but I heard those ads up here in northern New Mexico as well. Billboards, something that increased over time in terms of the study. There were very few billboards early on, but that's been expanding over the last several years of the study. Currently, there are 16 statewide, of which 7 are in the I-10 corridor. We've, as part of the project, they handed out rack cards, both in English and Spanish, distributed at New Mexico ports of entry. Dust storm stakeholders meeting in Las Cruces in 2016. Again, this has been especially dangerous in southern New Mexico along the I-10 corridor, especially around Lordsburg, where there's been ongoing dust storm problems. We've also seen, maybe you saw, some TV ads by Arizona DOT. And there's also been quite a bit of media coverage about this over time because of various crashes that we have. And there are, in the Lordsburg area, there are electronic message board warning signs as well that seem to be particularly helpful at communicating these messages to drivers while they are driving, and can really focus on what's in front of them. Here's the signage that we can see down in southern New Mexico, the Burma Chavez style signs, where you're reading one sign and then the next sign, and the signs tell a story about what you should do. Our study suggests that these kinds of measures are the best ways to get people to learn about the right thing to do. Drivers, when they are driving, are reading signage, and they are focused on the road, and so these signs can be really, really beneficial. You see one and you're just learning about what you should do. Here's the sign 4, keep your feet off the brakes, right? So you're just seeing these as you move along. The purpose of the driver awareness study was to provide information to freight drivers and regular auto drivers about how to respond in a dust storm and evaluate whether that information that was provided had an effect on driving behaviors. So we surveyed drivers at sort of the early point in the campaign in 2017 and then late in 2019 to see if we could find any improvement based upon the campaign during that time. We had a survey that we sent out to drivers, just regular drivers in New Mexico in both 2017 and 2019. It was a random sample. The sample frame we used was based upon the voter registration file. We oversampled areas along the I-10 corridor. And we had about 750 people in our sample in 2017, 650 in 2019. The margin error is about 3 to 4% on our sample. So this is for the driver sample. We also have a freight sample, and we asked people, what should you do if you encountered a dust storm? The campaign should have changed or altered people's idea of what they should do in a dust storm. So this is sort of the most important question. What should you do when you are met with a dust storm? And what we can see is that between 2017 and 2019, that more people did say the correct answer. The correct answer is down here at the bottom, pull over with headlights off. We can see people went from only 10% saying that's what they should do in 2017 to 30% saying that in 2019. So we did see an overall increase in that in that answer, which we think is a very good. That seems like the same. So I'm not sure. What should you do if you encounter? What did you do? Oh, sorry. What did you do if you encounter a dust storm? This is what people did do. Of course, we don't know when they encountered a dust storm. So we can see here that a lot of people, more people knew what they should do. A lot of people maybe didn't do that when they encountered a dust storm, but they could have encountered a dust storm long before they learned about the appropriate way to act. But we do see that there's a huge increase in least of knowledge of what to do compared to what they did previously. Where did people learn about information about dust storms? And you can see 2017 is this orange and 2019 is this sort of burnt red here, burnt orange perhaps. And you can see that the signs were really, huge difference. People saw information on the signs. They also heard information on the radio, and in both years saw information on TV. However, what we find in terms of how effective these were, we really find that the pull over with headlights off in terms of, seeing the signs, the signs on the road, the electronic signs, Java signs, all of these signs are the strongest thing that led people to identify what they should do in a dust storm. You can see some, some of these have very low effects. That's clearly the strongest effect is the signs, and that's the correct thing to do. We actually see, for example, that, people who saw something in the newspaper or on TV about it, more likely to make the wrong decision. So these signs were the best way to communicate this information. We found that for drivers, training also mattered. So a safety driving course that you might have to have because of a ticket or a job or something else like that for regular drivers did help them to know the right thing to do. So people who had indicated they had been to a driving trainer's course were twice as likely to do the right thing, to indicate they should do the right thing. But we do see this problem, right? This ongoing problem between, should I pull over and turn my headlights on, or should I pull over and turn my headlights off? And that's really the thing we need to be careful to keep trying to communicate, because it is so important to their safety. What doesn't matter much for drivers in terms of understanding what they should do, doesn't matter how many miles they drive annually or how old they are. So experience doesn't matter. Men and women make the same decisions. It doesn't matter whether they sometimes use a vehicle for work.
Lonnie just got muted somehow. Can you unmute?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Okay, well, am I back? Can you hear me now again?
Yes, yeah,
Yes,
we
okay,
can.
okay. I don't know, that was weird. So what doesn't matter is basically experience doesn't seem to matter. If you use a vehicle for work, how often you drive, your age doesn't matter, which also would be related to experience driving. Whether you're a male or female doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter if you live closer to a dust storm area or you live far away for regular drivers. And ethnicity really doesn't matter. We did find a small effect for Hispanics, but I believe that's likely linked to many of the Hispanic drivers were Mexican and their English skills were not always very strong. And so that may suggest we need to have some signs in Spanish. I'm not sure. Might be something to think about. For the freight driver survey, we went down, there is no way to sample truck drivers to get them to do sort of a mail survey. They're on the road all the time. But we were able to survey about 451 truckers driving and entering truck stops in both 2017 and 2019. In 2017, we did that in August and October, and we did that all in December of 2019. We want to just take a moment to really thank the New Mexico Trunking Association, who really facilitated our ability to visit those truck stops and to talk to truckers. We did face-to-face survey response with the truckers. Sometimes they wanted to do it themselves. Mostly they were happy to have a conversation with us. And we had a really great response rate. I would say more than 50% of truckers responded to us when we asked them to take our survey. If we look at the trucker population between 2017 and 2019, we can see that it basically was very, very similar. Almost all truckers are male, 9 out of 10 are male. We see very similar demographics, which makes us feel very confident that we were interviewing the same respondents over time. Where do freight drivers come from who, are driving through New Mexico? Of course, a lot of them are New Mexico, but most of them are actually Texas, and that was a switch. So in 2017, they were mostly residents of California, but in 2019, they were mostly residents of Texas. So Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, those are not surprisingly the places where truckers hail from mostly, but they come from all 50 states and the District of Columbia, and of course from Mexico as well. So for truckers, what should you do if you encountered a dust storm? We did a survey in northern New Mexico, well, in Albuquerque, central New Mexico, and then we did surveys in 2 different truck stops in southern New Mexico. So this is the data for the north. And I think that the northern locations here along I-25 and I-40, they don't have as many signs, not as much signage going on, not as much dust storm problems. And, what we see here is that, way more drivers, even in 2019, right, were likely to say, pull over and turn off with your headlights on. We didn't really see a change in pull over with your headlights off. We did see fewer people say they were just going to slow down. So we think that that's a good change, but we didn't see the big change in the northern location on the turning on or turning off the headlights. When we look at the southern locations, though, we do see a 12% increase in terms of truckers who indicated they would turn their lights off. We think that that's great. We see that there's been a decline in the headlights and keeping your headlights on, and a decline in all of the other things that you shouldn't do in a dust storm. But we still see this, disturbing quarter of the population who's just like, yeah, I'm just going to keep my headlights on, and I'm going to come back to that. What did you do when you encountered a dust storm? Northern locations. This is what they actually did as opposed to what they should do. We can see that here for truckers, actually, a quarter of truckers indicated they did the correct thing. But most of them, slowed down and turned on their headlights. May have to do with the severity of the storm or something like that. I just said a majority, I mean the mode, the plurality there. What did you do when you encountered a dust storm in the southern locations? We see a very similar distribution, a little more going on here. So a little better in the southern than the northern areas, suggesting that, those signs and, the actual dust storms down there probably are making a difference in terms of behaviors. In terms of educating truckers, again, it's the signs on the roads. It's all about the signs on the roads. The signs on the roads have been the most effective at teaching people what to do. People who saw signs, 56% of them got the answer right. Whereas people who didn't see the signs, 15% of them, only 15% of them got it right. So the signs are the solution, at least to providing information to both regular drivers and truckers. What doesn't work? Basically, everything else doesn't really work. We see just as many people, doing or more, doing the right thing or the wrong thing. It doesn't really seem to make a difference at all. These are very similar results, whether I saw any other ads for the truckers. Interestingly enough, for truckers, training doesn't matter at all. I don't know if these things are not included in their training courses in the way they have been in other self-driving courses. That might be something to look at, because we do see an effect in regular drivers, but we don't see that same effect in truckers. Again, maybe we need to be rethinking that material, especially on dust storm, and re-educating them about that issue. There is some evidence that experience matters to truckers, unlike for regular drivers. We do find that drivers who drive more were more likely to pull over with their headlights off. But when we really, the important thing is here, why do we have this problem between the idea that you should turn your lights off and not touch your brakes, or you should keep your headlights on? And what's the problem there? Well, the real problem is that we would have conversations with truckers and we'd go, why did you say this? Or we'd say to them, they'd say to us often, I read the signs. They say this is what I should do, but I don't think I should do that. I have a lot of experience driving, and you want to keep your headlights on, because if you don't, someone's going to come over and crash into your truck, and then they're going to be dead. And so I'm not going to do that. And then we explain to them the problem is, the lights, and how lights attract people to your car in a dust storm, and how the lights are really make it more likely that someone would crash into you, not less likely. And once we explain to them the situation, they have a real big aha moment, and they go, oh, I see what's going on here. I now understand this. And you can see them feeling much more like, I'll actually do that next time. And there's a big research in social psychology that tells us that explanations motivate behavior. So, just telling someone, this is what you should do, isn't enough. You need to tell them why they should do that. And when we tell people why they should do stuff, there's a lot of research that shows that they're more likely to do it then. And so we think that there needs to be, some way to expand this information drive to include the information of why it is so important to pull over and turn off your lights. And that would shift that data again, so that we would see more people making the correct decision. And, what we can say overall is I think that the campaign did demonstrate that there was an increase. So the campaign was somewhat effective. It increased knowledge of what to do in a dust storm, but for both truck drivers and regular drivers. Most importantly, the best way to communicate that with both groups is through signage. Signage clearly, above all else, provided accurate information and the most effective information. And other communications weren't. The only other thing is we really need to add to that information why you have to make that choice. And I think that we'd have, for the next campaign, again, see a greater shift to the correct choice for what to do when these things happen. Okay, and that's it for me.
Thank you very much.